Today, we're exploring a new flavor of the AI trade, AI-enabled consolidation. Think of it as distribution first rather than sales team first. Savvy Wealth just raised a $72 million Series B to continue recruiting America's best advisors and supercharge them with its AI platform. I'm joined by my partner, Mark Casady, who steered LPL Financial through a similar technology-enabled consolidation wave. And of course, Savvy's co-founder and CEO, Ritik Malhotra. Gents, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Great to be here.
So Ritik, talk about your journey to starting Savvy in 2021, because I recall very distinctly pulling up your LinkedIn when we were going to have our first conversation and just thinking, this guy is an absolute baller. And why is he focused on this segment? I mean, Mark and I know what wonderful businesses these are, but it was not obvious to me why you would discover that yourself. So talk about the journey.
Absolutely. So I'll take you back all the way to 2012. This is when I was starting my first company, dropped out of school, and it was in a completely different space. We're building cloud storage software. We eventually sold that company to Box, the cloud storage provider, now publicly traded, in 2014. Box went public the next year. And I tell everyone I had the best problem in the world, which is went from being completely broke to having life-changing amount of money. And I was very young at the time. So I got the advice naturally to go find a financial advisor. And I felt a sense of responsibility to do so because I had no business in understanding what I needed to do with my money at that age. That was where, it was 2015. The 6-year period between that point and 2021 starting Savvy was where I learned effectively two things. The first was after speaking with 100+ financial advisors and having the experience myself of being a client, what I realized was that the individual that I was working with was very, very helpful in navigating me through all the financial decisions that I needed to make, even at that age. But the actual experience itself was everything but. It was snail mailing documents, no project management, phone calls were the best form of communication. And when I spoke with all these advisors, they all pointed to the fact that there's a structural problem in the chain, which is that most of these individuals are sitting at 100+ year old institutions that have not adopted technology for the advisor. So they have no ability to extend that benefit down to the client. So taking all of those learnings, and over the years, we started a second company that eventually became a corporate wealth management business that we sold to Brex and scaled that to 10 billion plus in assets under management. We eventually, in 2021, I've been thinking about this problem for so long, looking for companies that were going to fix it. I said, there must be a way you can solve the advisor's problem. That's where the problem is. None of these robo-advisors are going to do this. And ultimately, never finding any conviction, I became, frustrated by it. I fell in love with the industries, giving financial advice. I was a junior kind of advisor to friends and family as well. So I said, let's just go and solve the problem. And the problem is to build a technology-first platform with the advisors first in mind.
Well, that's an excellent slow hunch. Mark, if you can flap back to when you joined LPL, and don't hesitate to give any context that you think would be helpful on your career up to that point and what you were doing in the industry. And you've told me more than a few times that you had to give some pretty tough news to your board over the years around how much you were going to spend on technology and why it was going to be necessary, and even really Todd's vision and the technology he built when he started the firm. So can you talk about how you saw the relationship between technology really being necessary to have profitable growth, and in the way you thought about the industry at the time?
Yeah, happy to do that. It's, really fun to think about those days, right? Because it was at a time where asset managers were the premier place to go if you were at all interested in wealth management or creating wealth for others or creating wealth for yourself. And so it wasn't an obvious decision to go to an independent broker dealer. They were still a very small part of the industry, and they had very unique characteristics around distribution. And my own thesis at the time was that asset management, while reigning supreme, eventually will become commoditized. It took longer than I thought it would, but it has happened. And therefore, the right place to be would be as close to the client as possible, which is what led me to be interested in LPL as the opportunity. It just happened to be serendipity that the president at the time of LPL was retiring. I knew Todd Robinson Robinson, the founder, and he reached out to talk about that change. So it's one of those things that just happens in your career where you get a bit lucky, where your thesis of what's going to happen in an industry, and then an opportunity opens up to play that thesis out professionally. Todd had spent the previous decade really putting out a server-based technology, which was very unusual at the time. I always asked him why he made that decision, didn't use mainframes, which would have been the easier decision to make. And he said, because I'm cheap. These are a much better technology at the time. Turned out to be a brilliant decision because we could ride the scale that server technology, really created, and build the business around that original footprint of what he called BranchNet. So he had a predilection to want to spend money on technology, make the company very efficient. I saw an opportunity to really supercharge distribution, meaning support advisors, make sure that they're able to support their clients and build a business that was built on a no conflict model. So it was a nice combination of strategy and tactics coming together. What happened then, from that point forward was exactly as you just described, which is we had to say, okay, let's pour lots and lots of money into technology and into scaled operations. I was just reminded recently the gentleman who's president at a competitor organization had reached out. They're being bought by LPL and said to me, one thing I just want to remind you of is that from the time I first met you, which was a long time ago, you always talked about how important scale was in the industry. And look now, look how scaled the player is at LPL. And that was our driving call. And that's the board very much supported it. We needed to plow as much money back into technology and to service as we could, so that we had a full suite of capabilities for an advisor to come and affiliate with LPL. Very different at the time, a very different strategy for the independent broker dealer segment, and a very different strategy as it relates to, there really wasn't an RIA community at that point. It was very nascent, back in 2002, 2004. And so we were able to put as much capital as we could into technology, which really paid off in productivity and paid off in our ability to scale the business, and then get it to a point in which it could be the flywheel that we certainly see that it is today.
And can you talk about some of the parallels you see between the IBD market back then and the RIA market today?
That's really what attracted me to what Ritik is doing at Savvy. I mean, Ritik's an amazing CEO, right? And an amazing founder. It's the entrepreneur that Frazer, you and I spend all the time looking for, right? A serial entrepreneur who's humble and successful and gets it, right, in so many ways. So that's the first part of it is that attachment to you, Ritik, and the team that you've built. And then the next part is exactly that thesis, which is what happened in the IBD market, the independent broker dealer market, was going to happen and is happening in the RIA market. I'd argue that the RIA market's a good 10 to 15 years behind where the independent broker dealer market is. The independent broker dealer market today is a barbell, right? It happens in every industry, steel, manufacturing, whatever you want to call. Eventually you get very large scale players and you get very small specialists. And if you're in between, look out, because you're going to either be consolidated up, or you're going to be shrunk down, and shrinking is never fun in a business. And that hasn't happened in the RIA community. It's still in the early phases of growth, and it will eventually hit a barbell stage, but probably not for another, I'd say, 10 years, maybe a little faster because of AI technology facilitating, better profit margins and those things. So that's what appealed to me when we thought about this from a strategic standpoint for our fund, which is we want to back a vertical expression of AI. We want to back, of course, a fantastic team. That's a table stake. And we thought that Savvy's technology and the approach the team took to technology was unique to others in the industry. And that's what's, our thesis was for investing. It's what then led us to make the investment and now, be very thrilled with the growth that we're seeing, as that technology gets better known in the community.
Tremendous. I was listening to an interview with Mark Andreessen the other day, and one of the things he said, which is like a lot of the things he said, they're kind of truisms, but the way he articulates them is often very, very insightful.
Yes, he's very good at that, yeah.
But it was, if you have sort of a halfway competent entrepreneur who's decided to dedicate their life to bringing a product vision to market, it's probably a good idea. The question is usually timing, and the timing is often wrong. And so, and entrepreneurs are kind of notoriously early. And, Ritik, you started this journey 4 years ago. I don't know if when you started, and maybe you could illuminate this a little bit, if you thought, okay, the conditions are right for this consolidation, or more, the experience is wrong and I can make it better. But how do you think about the kind of maturity of the industry today, and what conditions do you think needed to be in place for you to pursue this advisor first kind of consolidation strategy?
It's a great question, and I think much easier looking back. But the few things that we really honed in on when we were starting in 2021 was that the first was just this massive trend, which I know Mark alluded to, of going independent towards RIA. So you kind of see this from the global financial crisis and onwards, and it just kind of continues where more and more AUM dollars are becoming RIA of many different flavors. RIA has all these other flavors as well. But that trend basically gave us the sense that there's a strong tailwind, that there is a level of interest in the RIA field. So that's first and foremost. The second was, from a consolidation perspective, from a trend, especially 2021, was massive amounts of M&A, which is totally fine in a kind of an efficient market, will continue to happen. But the thing that we realized was what no one else was talking about and focusing on was, well, what about the value prop for individuals that want to continue operating their business and don't want to sell? Because what we actually saw was, you all saw these statistics about 20% of the industry is basically post-retirement age, and therefore they need succession planning. Or, hey, liquidity is great, so you should take money off the table now. But actually a vast majority of advisors, especially in the sub $500 million AUM, solo or team advisors, they weren't looking for an M&A, especially if they're mid-career. So we said, okay, let's put those two things together. You have individuals that want to run a business. There's a massive movement to RIA. And so but there isn't a consolidated platform approach that can actually serve that kind of a customer, and do that with all of the latest advancements in technology. I would add that now, fast forwarding 4 years, the one additional set of the condition that's actually helped us accelerate that vision has been the rapid pace of AI. I mean, to me, after reading the Transformer paper, I thought this is going to be a brilliant thing in maybe 20 years, but I think, no way could we have predicted the pace of development. And that's added just more fuel to this thesis overall.
It is amazing how fast it's moving, isn't it? It's having a 45-year career. It's the fastest technology deployment I've ever seen. So much so that you have to stop and think for a moment. Did I just see that agents were launched by ChatGPT? Did I just see that, Google came out with Veo 3? Like these are just earth changing and so fast and so frequent. It's easy to miss them, if you're not careful.
100%. Yeah, and I think there's this. The only comparison I could imagine is the internet wave back in, call it, 96 to 2001. And I think the structural condition of just this environment where other people's improvements will benefit your company, it's such a rare combination.
Yeah, and when the internet boom came, which I was fortunate enough to be an executive in the middle of, it felt like a wonderful opportunity to really connect directly with consumers. And it had all that same feel of excitement and change, but not nearly the level of change this represents, nor the sheer capabilities that are being launched. The internet was really taking everything you'd been able to do in paper and in person and put it online. Big breakthrough, huge change. But essentially it still was the same activity done in a different way, different modality. And this is really, to me, a new modality, a new way of doing things that are there. And what I love about what you and the team are doing is you're thinking about this new capability that's come out, or this way that an advisor does business. How can we make it better with technology, of which often generative AI is a key part of it, but also, basic, technology is important, right? And in the industry, there's been such an underinvestment in core technology that that's why you get the results you do, where advisors, feel frustrated by the lack of productivity, the lack of ability to really spend time with clients.
Mark, we've to be a little tongue in cheek, we've given Ritik quite a bit of money to allow us to give advice. So maybe we can treat ourselves by giving out advice for free today. When you, and I know you're involved with a number of different players in the space, expressing, our kind of views around the intersection of AI and wealth tech in different forms of trades. So you spend a lot of time with RIAs. What's the kind of, what are the things that you're telling people? Maybe it depends on different personas, but how, and frankly, to the extent you're open to it, and we can edit anything out that Ritik you'd like us to, but the kind of conversations you're having with Ritik around where the puck is going in the industry and where to focus. What are the blind spots they think a lot of people are missing?
Well, I think in Ritik's case and the team's case, they have a really great operating plan. And I love the process that you're using, Ritik, which is, saying, here's what it is that we see going forward in the next quarter, the next 6 months, the next year that we want to have. And that we'll adjust that based on feedback or based on, new capabilities that come out. So I feel like in the case of Savvy, is a process that automatically says, I'm going to look at what's happening in the world. I'm going to adopt my technology and my plan to what's happening in the world. But otherwise, this is my plan and this is what I'm going to deliver. And that is adhering to a delivery schedule, I know in my career has always been critically important. Because if you can't deliver, then you can't really get the business to build. And it's okay to say to somebody, this is what my priority is as a company, and these are not my priorities as a company, and therefore we're sticking to that. One of the things that you still hear about LPL is someone will say, I've got this great new idea for them, and they'll hear back, I don't know why they don't want to engage. And I said, it's because they have a plan, right? And they're executing against that plan that they believe is going to give them the greatest ROI and the greatest impact to advisors. And that's what I see at Savvy, is that same desire to really impact advisors, impact growth of the business, and staying on plan. And then the team is just incredibly technically sound. Hard for me to be able to say that given my lack of soundness in technology. But my joke is I could be an AI expert on a podcast, but don't ask me to program and don't ask me to argue RAG versus something else. I'm just not going to win that argument. But the one thing I do know is that you've got to keep an ear to the ground. You've got to make sure that you're using the best tool for the situation at hand, and you've got to challenge yourself and the team to make sure that is what's happening. And that's what I see happening at Savvy. That makes me so happy, as an investor. It certainly for us is the largest check we wrote in fund number 2 at once, to a company. And it's the first time, as you well know, Frazer, we've looked at, I don't know how many RIAs, and this is the only one that we've wanted to back, with our capital from the fund. I think importantly, in terms of RIAs, they're still basically at a level that is quite remarkable, which is having a technology strategy would be a first place to start, having a brand strategy, having an investment advice or investment counsel strategy. Most RIAs are lacking the basics of a business that is about delivering on the client's expectations and plans. Now, they have a lot of incredibly competent individual advisors who do that every day. So they can rely on the system to work on its own without thinking about what are we trying to build towards. That is going to be a mistake, to ignore the opportunity to really have a plan for sameness of brand, sameness for investment process, sameness of technology, because you're going to miss all the scale advantages that I mentioned earlier. Second thing is you're going to miss an opportunity to really tell the world what you're about, and how you're trying to do the work you're doing to get them to their financial futures. Those who've advanced beyond that, who actually do have a plan around it, for the most part, we're trying to figure out what to do about generative AI specifically. And so, as you know, we have a number of companies that do horizontal plays, look like enterprise SaaS type opportunities in wealth management, and they're out and about talking to REAs. One in particular has probably spoken to 90 of them at this point, and has a very good sense of the state of the thinking. And the thinking is very basic. It's even, needing to have a discussion that starts with the board of the REA about how to think about AI and what program they should in place. So that tells us there's an enormous opportunity for a company that is forward in technology, which of course is what Savvy is, and has a plan for how to think about the advice they're delivering. And that's going to be an enormous advantage as the next 2 or 3 years unfold. And advisors are going to see that. And they're going to understand that if I want my practice to grow, I need to come here in order to be able to get it to grow the most effectively and most efficiently for what I'm trying to do for my clients.
Yeah, let's get a little concrete, and then I think also talk about maybe the evolution. Ritik, we've talked a lot about the lift from AI. I think we all see it in our own daily workflows. If you wouldn't mind making it real for the sort of the advisor experience on your platform, and I think when you talk about the kind of user or customer audience that you started with cloud storage, that's probably a very technical user base with a lot of familiarity, and going to an advisor, which the great advisors are sales professionals inherently, business development professionals, relationship oriented. Some have all kinds of other skills, but they're not successful if they don't have those skills, and they tend to index hard on them. So, when you think about your kind of evolution as sort of building product to enable somebody for this new persona, and then balancing that with all the things that they could be doing with AI, how do you think about it, and what are you offering and delivering today?
It's interesting you mentioned the cloud storage example. We've actually taken some of the principles and learnings there to apply how we think about technology and AI development here for a financial advisor. And what we realized was that when we're developing highly technical software for cloud storage, the end user was someone that's sitting at a very large enterprise effectively. And it could be someone that's out in the field sales, needed access to files to pull the latest pitch deck or something like that. Or it could be someone that's on the marketing team. And rarely ever did we have to think about the technical user when we're developing that. The reason I mention all that is that we developed a core principle of go to the ends of the earth to make sure that the experience has as little change management involved. Because if you can build products and processes that meet the customer where they work, that is going to be the most effective way to get adoption. I mentioned that was a core learning, and I think it was just frustratingly how often we had to do things to make that happen back in the day. And when we think about that today, it's essentially the same case where when we study the landscape of different startups that have approached redefining parts of the wealth management journey, we realize that there's oftentimes they're reinventing the way that something is already done. We took the flip approach and said, look, if financial advisor we made a list of almost 200 different things that they're doing on a given base, on a given kind of month or year, whatever time frame we're going to look at, and effectively said, look, let's just assume that those are the best ways to do them, just as the first version. For each of those, where can we insert technology and now AI to effectively reduce the amount of time it takes to achieve the same or better output? And so that's the framework. I used it to make it real. Let me give you a real kind of a example. And this is actually just earlier this month, actually, I should say last month, we launched an improved AI version of investment proposals. Investment proposals have been around for forever, and advisors would effectively have some sort of template deck that they would incorporate and run a bunch of analysis for what a prospective client's portfolio could look like if they had followed the X, Y, and Z recommendations, so on and so forth. We realized actually that these are basically taking human to human interaction inputs, basically conversations advisors are having with a prospective client, taking some of those things, inputting it into a set of data that is effectively the market data, the models, and all the other things, and risk and all of that stuff, and then taking that and creating a visually appealing output that is slides that the advisor can then run through at a follow-up meeting with the prospect. Each of these steps, as a broken out part, we either figured out how to do technology automation, which is effectively ETL, extract, transform, load of just data from one place to another, or AI to effectively do some sort of a computation that required previously some level of decision making. And stitching all this together was the product that we kind of had shipped out. Hopefully that adds some clarity to how we do this.
No, certainly. And it was funny when we were doing our kind of diligence calls and speaking to the advisors on the platform, the sort of energy and excitement and the number of ideas they had for you for things they wanted to build, which I think tends to be a really bullish signal because people buy in enough to the platform to care. Are there other things aside from the re-release or the version 3, version 2 of the investment proposal module that I'm just going to jump off the page for advisors and for clients, because not only are you getting advisors to shift, but they're bringing their clients with them, so now they're kind of experiencing the savvy experience. Are there pieces of the stack that are worth highlighting?
I would say from a client facing lens, I would say a few things that are helpful. And again, we take this from the lens of the advisor and what they communicate on what is really appealing to the client. Number one, just having the ability for the advisor to present a consolidated balance sheet, which to us seem table stakes, right? Very much kind of like the bit.coms and the now there's a number of apps out there, but consolidated balance sheet that has real-time data feeds from the managed accounts plus the non-managed accounts. Great way to visualize, net worth up until now. And then of course, add the financial planning data to show kind of what that looks like in the future. And so that was nice and appealing. Clients like that, they can always play around with it either on mobile or on the web app, and it just makes the work feel real. And of course, advisors like it as well because it became another opportunity to find other unmanaged accounts that they can actually call up and kind of recommend advice and kind of bring that into the fold. So that was a big moment. And I would say the other one, again, what we would think is table stakes was onboarding. So shockingly, the amount of paperwork required in onboarding was always a kind of a fearful moment for an advisor because that's each page is a page that could go wrong. And it's also this cumbersome moment for the client. I mean, it was just frustratingly, the clients would spend weeks, sometimes months not filling things out or new account opening, et cetera, because it just was an arduous thing to take this paperwork, scan it, and do all this stuff. So just building a fully digital onboarding, which is effectively just another way of consolidating this like complex decision tree of account types, where money's moving from, all these little knobs and whistles into a digital flow that figures out all those permutations, was also a delightful moment. Less than 5 minutes for a client to onboard. Advisors are not fearing the transition or new account opening. And, so some very kind of simple stuff that we thought would be table stakes was actually revolutionary here.
And so you've articulated a number of experiences, which I think for kind of any other digital product, especially given what the ACV of the client, what you're really paying for this service, you would kind of expect to be table stakes. Sort of you have high LTV, relatively low customer satisfaction, just that you're competing against. So there must have been moments in this journey for you where you thought, what we can deliver is just going to be, it's literally going to be 10x better than the alternative. Let's just go straight to clients and just amass them. What convinced you to focus on this strategy, which is clearly the one that's working and correct, but say, it's going to be easier for us to deliver this experience in partnership with advisors?
There was a lot of time that I spent prior to starting the company validating this, because when you looked at all the attempts prior from a technology angle in wealth management, or what I would call kind of the Silicon Valley technology folks coming into wealth management, every single version was about displacing the advisor or automating something, and robo-advisors were kind of the quintessential example of this. So I can now say, kind of looking at the graveyard of startups, thankfully we did not step out. But the thing that there's two things that really, really made this angle of being advisor first the right way to do this. The first was actually more tactical. This study I remember where I think there was about 1,000 high net worth individuals, basically, or basically anyone that had $1 million self-stated net worth to $10 million that were surveyed, who basically were given the options of how they would like to deal with their finances. And 83% of them said that they would want to work with an advisor. 6% said that they would want a robo-advisor, and the rest were agnostic. But the fascinating part was that 83% that said they wanted an advisor, 100% of that population said they had no problem if the advisor used a robo-advisor to actually do the investments and management. So that gave you the insight that actually the value that someone is ascribing once they hit that net worth is actually that human touch. So as I was curious, I was like, why exactly is this? I can't talk to those survey respondents. I mean, it was, I think, a year old by the time I read this. So I actually read this book on the psychology of the mind and making choices. And it turns out that the same part of the brain that gets activated when you think about making critical health decisions, it's the fear response, is the same part of the brain that gets activated when making very financial decisions as well. And it's effectively, the higher your net worth, the more that you feel like you need someone else to be making those decisions. It's very, very similar kinds of, to alleviate the fear response. And actually, that is the critical part. At the end of the day, the advisor is not only the smartest person, having studied the laws of finance to understand what exactly to do, but also they're the buffer and the kind of almost the financial therapist, which is a critical part of this. So that was what gave us conviction on this is the approach, and this is going to be the way of the future here.
It's I have to say, I mean, we've spent quite a bit of time together, but it is really uncanny, some of the things that you say and how much alignment there is between yourself and Mark. It's like I've been hearing a lot of these secrets, years than I'm willing to admit to. Joyous years that they've been.
I can be repetitive. I understand. Yeah.
No, I just didn't want to age myself. For Mark, you've operated in a very complex, high stakes environment in this arena. You have complexity around when directly acquiring a business, they have their own technology that needs to be integrated. You have kind of a sort of acqui-hire modality where you bring individuals onto your stack, which is attractive for a number of reasons. But of course, you then need to figure out a way to get the assets. There is there's just sort of acquiring households directly through marketing and sales channels. We Savvy has a very defined strategy, which is working extremely well. That we've kind of articulated today. As this industry, and obviously Savvy moves into an industry that is really starts to go into an overcharged barbell. What are the kinds of trade-offs, or how would you think about managing that complexity from sort of first principles as you think about, okay, well, maybe it would be time to acquire a competitor. Maybe it would be time to acquire, frankly, a larger RIA that doesn't have the technology that we have.
Right.
How would you want to have those conversations, and what kind of frameworks would you think about using?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the good news here is, rinse, repeat, right? Is that we're in a mode in watching the company, and again, Ritik and your team execute is more of the same, because you've got an unusual opportunity to be able to convince advisors who want to grow, who are a bit younger in their practice, to bring their practice, to Savvy Wealth. That's a big deal. Being able to win that consistently at the scale you're winning it and the pace you're winning it, matters a lot. So don't get distracted. It would be my advice right now: buy an acquisition, because that will definitely slow you down in the core process of recruiting, and really selling the story. There'll come a moment, as you just said, Frazer, where is the company at 10 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion of assets, and an opportunity to acquire, may come up. I think it's probably somewhere around in there. But the way I would do it then is make sure you've got a team that's isolated, in the sense that their only focus is that M&A, and then the integration of that organization into the core platform of what Savvy will have built by then. Because in the absence of that, what you do is you tend to overtax the system, and you slow down organic growth, which is never, ever a good idea. So we had a dedicated team during our high growth phase through acquisition that did nothing but look at diligence and then ultimately execute an integration plan for those things that we bought. We did a total of 12 acquisitions during my tenure. 6 of them came pretty closely together, and they were all decent sized independent broker dealers. So we needed to do that. That let us have the support for existing advisors stay intact and be as in the shape that we needed to be. So they were excited to continue to be with LPL. And it allowed us to be able to still have organic growth through that means at the same time. It's what really led to quite a growth and scale of the organization over that time period. My goal was quite simple. When I joined, we had about 80 billion of client assets. And I wanted to get, to half a $500 billion, 500 billion of assets, which seemed pretty ambitious at the time. And basically, to be able to do that, we had to do a combination of M&A and others. So getting dual tracking, but you can't afford to do dual tracking at the size we are today. The only other place for M&A here would be if there was some technology capability that the team felt it couldn't build, or was cheaper and faster to buy. We know there's a lot of fintechs out there that are, not exactly where they need to be, and therefore can't get funding, and therefore you might be able to pick up, an inexpensive technology, but that is to be seen whether that's really viable or not, for Savvy in particular. I think you've got a formula, Ritik, that is working, so stick to it, right? Is the best advice at this stage.
And I hope it's okay if we take off our kind of like wealth tech specific hats for a moment and think about maybe fintech and just technology more broadly. I think one of the more interesting and certainly exciting kind of investment plays we're seeing across different industries is various flavors of kind of AI-led consolidation, whether it's straight roll-up or consolidation in different parts of a business, but really like leading with an AI platform to take in existing businesses and transform them. We're seeing CRE in accounting. We're seeing Acrisure in the brokerage world. ENAM kind of, it's not exactly clear what they're doing, but focused on sort of more traditional industries, especially in Europe. But, I suspect some of these will be, too early or good on slides, not in practice. Do you both feel like we're in the early innings of this? Is this something that you're excited about, that you see applying to other places, or do you think wealth tech makes it kind of sort of an idiosyncratically good idea here rather than in other spaces?
I was going to think about, what is the framework in which we can evaluate some of these, because I think it depends on the industry. And one of the things I've always thought about is like, if you think about call it the hot swapping, right, of taking a legacy business and then bolting into the AI capabilities, you have to look at like, what is AI particularly good at? And what is the industry's threshold at which accuracy and reliability needs to be? So effectively, think about those two variables. AI is actually good at, in my opinion, generally like things that are relatively deterministic. And so actually, that's why coding is actually quite good, because there's a corpus of data that actually produces, that code that effectively will produce outcomes. And so you can hone the hallucinations down to be as close to zero as possible in a deterministic task. And then so making that list of like, what are the other deterministic areas of output that currently exist in services businesses? And then what is the threshold of correctness? So for example, actually like, if you need 99.999% accuracy on something, I would articulate that like it might be too soon to apply this hot swapping, and it still will require a considerable amount of human or manual intervention. That still could be okay, because you're still getting leverage on that human intervention. And I do think actually wealth tech actually fits into that category to a certain degree.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's also sort of about the workflow, because you could say that coding has to be accurate. Like it will either compile or it won't, but because you can iterate so fast because of what the workflow is. Whereas, with an individual, if you get if you kind of deploy their asset allocation strategy wrong, you don't just get to say like, whoopsies.
Wish I would have gotten that right. Yeah, I do think that we will see, again, in the next 3 to 5 years, the separation of those who understood these tools early and those who did not. Because it'll show up in profit margins, it'll show up in speed of growth. And it doesn't just in wealth tech, it's across, various industries. So what's fascinating to me is whether it's our LPs or whether it's friends who are running companies, or in the startup land, the state of thinking of the board and the state of thinking of the executive team matters a lot in thinking about these tools. And that they've got to be ready for, the possibilities of what can be done. And most of this is going to be productivity gain, right? That's the easy area to pick up. But if you're not experimenting, right, and you're not trying some of these tools and understanding where it works and where it doesn't, then you're likely to have a competitor who is doing that, and that competitor is likely to get to better profits, better growth, before you do. And that is the name of the game of business: is you got to get there before everybody else does. And sometimes you can get lucky where your timing is particularly good. But in the end, it always comes back to fundamentals. Can I, drive better profits? Can I drive better growth? Can I drive better, net promoter scores or customer satisfaction that others can do? And if I can do that using whatever set of tools I use, that's going to be the winning strategy. We know that.
Ritik, how do you see the industry evolving? I know we've kind of asked Mark to talk a lot about the parallels that he sees, and maybe that kind of gives us a hint of where we're going. And I know Mark has many slow hunches about the industry, which he's kind enough to share. But what are the how do you see the world changing? I mean, you've seen your own background, the access you've had to capital, given the success you've had, your experience building technology, the people that you can recruit. How big of a barrier to entry for kind of future competitors does that create? How do you think about the environment really going forward?
I think there's let's take each of these apart. So definitely, I think the competition question. One of the things I've always felt is that this isn't an easy business to stand up, because you have a high degree of operational kind of services that you need to get up and running first before you can start adding technology. And so it's almost like building two businesses in the early days. And I remember that was some of the biggest fears of a lot of the backers that we in year one. So to me, that just means, look, then the amount of grit and resilience will translate into defensibility. And it's actually why if you build a software only wealth tech startup, they're totally fine. I mean, I think there's plenty of opportunity there, but that's very different than doing this kind of vertically integrated approach here. So that's, I think, in from a competition perspective. Where the industry goes and how it changes, I think the natural answer here is that the ability to, and I think we've talked about this already in multiple forms, it's the ability to use AI to speed up the processes that don't actually add value is effectively the trend of the industry, right? And there's the saying, I think, is like focus on what makes your beer taste better. And ultimately, the value that in wealth management I think we sometimes lose sight of this is that it is the direct advice and implementation of the said advice from the advisor to the client. And that can take 1,000 different forms. There's a ton of things that have to go into it. But effectively, that's the area that we would never want to touch with any of this technology and AI. That's like the sacred kind of bond between the advisor and client. Everything else is an implementation detail. And if you view the world that way, you can effectively kind of fast forward and find every single slice of the implementation detail, the middle and back offices, like we all like to call it, and basically being replaced by some sort of workflow automation or some sort of AI-enabled automation in order to make the beer just taste that much better.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. It is August 1, which I actually can't believe. So we are going to shift into the rapid fire section, which will bring some levity to this lovely summer day. I'm going to ask you both series of questions, and Ritik, you go first, then Mark. Who impresses you?
First person that came to mind was Mark Zuckerberg. I think resilient, gritty founder, even at this scale, and just continues to have this immense forward vision, which looks crazy on paper at times, but seems to really kind of show everyone that he's right most of the time than not.
Yeah, for me, it's entrepreneurs generally, right? It's well, those who are incredible, like a Mark Zuckerberg, and those who, frankly, aren't as incredible. But what they have is this unique ability to just keep going forward, and to have a vision for the world that's different than the world that we live in today, and try to get the world to align to their vision. I love that energy and drive that comes from that.
What piece of media, book, podcast, movie, article, essay have you gifted or shared the most?
I'll give two. One is work related. It's a book called Scaling Through Chaos, and it is a book written by Index Ventures, and it's effectively this like tactician's guide on how to scale a rapidly growing business. I just loved like all the wisdoms that they've accumulated. There's a second book, which is not related to work, called The Mind-Body Prescription. It is a book on how our mind can play tricks on us. And there's all these different anxieties and fears that can build that can cause all sorts of things like physical pain and like disabilities and whatnot. And I actually think it's a really good example of how just there's so many things that we could do that convince our minds that convince us to slow down, and realizing that and breaking out of that is sometimes the best way to move forward.
Yeah, for me, it's always about what's interesting to that person, right? So I tend not to have a lot of repeat of recommendations. It's what's interesting to you, right? So if you're a Chicago Cubs fan, then there's something about Chicago Cubs that I think is interesting that I want to get out to you. If it's related to something that you're thinking about, I unfortunately last summer spent most of the summer reading books on democracies and how they succeed and how they fail. I wouldn't recommend it as summer reading, and basically, there are a number of people who have an interesting, similar set of topics that are interesting to them. And so, that would cause me to send out, the best of those 8 for people to read. So I like to think about what is it that's important to you, and how can I help be a filter, for the way the world's working. That is just interesting to me. And I know I appreciate it when others, do the same for me.
Ritik, what fascinates you today?
Really, I've been loving all these AI wearables. I know, Mark, I think I showed you the last one but I think it's fascinating. It could be the third device modality that could really help augment our experiences.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I'm in the same place, because it's about how we're going to be able to capture this information. What I'm fascinated by is imagine a world in which I communicate through speech. And I'm imagining a horrible environment. And I can still remember vividly the first time I watched someone speak into, what was then a connected earphone in a phone in Italy. It was in the Milan airport. And there's this great big Italian guy I didn't see the phone. I just saw this cord, but I didn't really know what it was. This was a long time ago. And he's speaking in this amazing Italian voice. And I'm thinking he's speaking to me, right? Like he's coming towards me. He's speaking to me. I don't know how to speak Italian, but boy, he seems like an interesting guy, right? And And then I realized, oh, he's speaking into like this device that is allowing him to speak to others. I know it sounds very ancient technology, but I keep coming back to that moment and seeing it and thinking, what a great innovation, and then how horrible it's turned into, right? Where I have to hear everyone's half conversation. Now imagine a world in which I interface with all of my devices, through speech, which is easy to imagine, and I do some today. I often dictate text or emails because it's just easier to do. What a horrible environment that's going to be. So I'm curious how we're going to solve for that problem.
Yeah.
Whether it's certainly going to be technology based, or it's going to be social norm based. I'm not sure which, but that's my current fascination. How do we overcome that device?
We are going to need to solve that. I mean, the sort of the no headphones YouTube video viewing, like on an airplane or something in public, it's going to be.
It's just awful.
Parting words for the audience, of whom there are millions.
I'll do something that's less related to all the things we talked about. I think one of the core things that I follow and kind of keep and makes me motivated to continue every day is you get a very few shots in your life at doing something meaningful. So always spend the most amount of time you can to make sure the shot you're taking is going to be meaningful if you get it right. And then once you do, go 200% in and just try to make that the most meaningful thing you can. And I think that to me is how you get joy out of the work you do, whether it's truly for profit or not. So those are my parting words.
Mark?
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah, for me, it's always about inner space. I just recently have had some moments of helping folks who are just out of high school or just out of college think about next activities or what they're interested in, and they're exploring it, and they're in a lovely phase of life, right, of trying to figure out what's next. And there's always the sort of trite saying of enjoy the journey and be in the moment of what you're doing, and that's true. But I think what I always try to tell that someone at that level or any of us is know inner space, know yourself better than anybody else knows you. And it sounds strange to say, but I know that I've experienced, mainly from my wife of 44 years, and feedback about when I'm not aligned with my inner self and my external self. And I think understanding what our foibles are, understanding what our biases are, understanding our predilections, our interests, right, what drives us, that's the most important thing you can do, because once you understand that, the environment that you need to be in order for those best traits or best curiosities to come out. And so I always like thinking about, manage my inner space, manage my desires, and that will ultimately lead to just a lot of fun and a lot of excitement in your life over what is going to turn out to be a very long career.
Well, as someone that I know has experienced a lot of fun and excitement, I can tell you there's something to that. Thank you both so much for making the time. I am very much looking forward to being together in person in New York, probably sometime this fall. So thanks again, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks.
It's great.
Good to see you. Take care.